Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and on this beautiful morning, because I'm having a good day, I thought I would do a little bit of a thought experiment for you guys. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And because I like to talk about nerdy stuff, and because I have a lot of friends who are nerds, you guys know how those conversations go where people talk about different superpowers. If I could have any one superpower, what would it be? And when you talk about lifters, people who lift oftentimes really, really like comic books. They like superheroes. It tends to go hand in hand. Go see the hardcore guys who lift and look at how many comic book related tattoos you'll see. If you do that, you'll understand what I'm talking about there. Really common, really common. And quite frankly, you get into sports like powerlifting, and they're all nerds. Everybody's a nerd in powerlifting. It's something you'll find if you go to a few meets and meet people. So, these topics come up of these different superpowers of if I could have this or that or whatever. And, I had one a while back. Some friends, we were chatting about some of this stuff, just laughing about it. And I actually pointed out and realized that technically, if you had regeneration, you could develop super strength to go with it. Now, not necessarily Superman strength, but could you be stronger than every world record holder in every strength sport? Yeah, you could do that purely by having the power of regeneration, because it has to do with training recovery. And I think that's the critical thing here, is that it does let us know how interesting and how valuable recovery is. It lets us know a lot about that. There's a reason why when we put ourselves in a certain physical environment, we can gain strength and muscle very, very easily compared to others. And I'll discuss a little bit of that in a minute. But what do I mean? Well, take something like the X-Men movies. You look at Wolverine's level of regeneration. Let's say you had a fifth of what he has, right? Even a tenth of that level of regeneration, of how quickly he just heals tissue. So what would that mean for someone training? That means they wouldn't have to deal with any of the negative fallbacks of training, the things that we really have to deal with in terms of negatives, and they would only have the positive aspects of it. Meaning, if you could do a week's worth of healing and recovery inside of 3 minutes, 5 minutes, essentially, as long as you had access to fuel, in other words, as long as that person was getting enough glucose and amino acids in their system, you could sit around sipping on the right food or eating the right food and completely recover and grow from a workout within a matter of minutes. And in fact, you probably wouldn't even benefit from multi-set training in the sense of each new set would be a new workout. It would be like a whole new day. So if you pushed everything to failure, you would have instantaneous results. And think about it in that perspective, and it tells us how valuable recovery is if you were to look at that. Because, hypothetically, if you took someone who had such an ability, not saying it's real, this is a thought experiment, but who could recover and heal that quickly, because recovery is all tissue. You're talking about bone, you're talking about nervous system recovery, right? So if you were to do back to back to back, say a set of squats, rows, deadlifts, bench press, right? Just rotate through those four, something like that. Take a really heavy set to failure of each one just down the row, keeping glucose and amino acids in so that you would have fuel to train and, stuff to help rebuild tissue with quicker, assuming you would even need that in these scenarios. You would pretty much grow as soon as you finished your set. You would get the adaptative response. So you could take sets to absolute failure. And here's why that matters. You could take them to failure without concerns for overtraining. So you could technically get a growth stimulus, because we know only the last 5 reps going towards failure even stimulate muscle growth. And also in that case, stimulate strength. So what would happen? A person could do those, and over the course of, say, a day just training, they could do 10 absolute sets to failure of each one of those, right? In one day, no problem. And they would actually recover and grow as if they had had a couple of days of growth in between each set. You guys see where I'm going with this? That would basically mean that each set of each of those would be about the equivalent of workout, about 10 workouts, the equivalent of growth and adaptation, with no time to detrain, because we have this recovery curve. We have the stress recovery adaptation cycle. You would remove all of that because you would adapt within seconds, within a minute. If your tissue healed that quickly, that means your bone density would improve, your connective tissue would strengthen, your muscles would thicken, and because you could start handling heavy weights real fast, you would get the nervous system response. And then again, nerve tissue, there's a recovery component to that. That would fall inside of regeneration. So what would happen? Well, in theory, you could take an untrained person who had such an ability, and within a matter of weeks, because you got to think about it that way, each set, and you could do 10 of those a day, would be the equivalent of a full workout. So every single day, they would get something in the range of the equivalent of 10 full body sessions worth of adaptation. And remember, there's no detraining because you're taking no days off, right? In fact, you're technically getting multiple sessions a day if you did such a thing. So what that would mean is that inside of really a few days, they could get an entire year's worth of strength and growth. They get an entire year's worth of adaptation. So you're talking about someone who essentially inside of 2 to 3 days could finish all of their new gains. Then inside of the next 2 to 3 days, they could get their next year's worth of growth with no detraining. So they would technically gain strength and muscle quicker. What would happen if you did this for 3 months? Now, keeping in mind, you're always almost instantaneously recovering, so you wouldn't get the ebb and flow that a normal lifter gets. You would basically make a linear progression indefinitely until you max out things like your bone density and connective tissue strength and everything. And essentially, this person, without any anabolics, would look like Ronnie Coleman inside of a month, possibly inside of a couple of weeks. They would be that size. You'd have a person who within literally a month could probably squat 1,000 pounds. They could probably deadlift 1,000 pounds. They could probably bench 600-700 pounds inside of a couple of weeks of training from being a ranked novice because of that recovery component. So what does this tell us about the importance of recovery? It tells us everything. So this is why when you're trying to maximize growth, things like sleep, rest, food matter. I mean, food itself has an enormous recovery component. And that's something I always tell people. There's a reason bulking works. There's a reason bulking works. You get an enormous recovery and hormone response from overeating. Now, there are drawbacks. Obviously, you can gain fat. But, I mean, when you think about it from that perspective, look at someone like Ray Williams. Dude is really fat. But as far as drug-tested powerlifting goes, he is a world record holder. And, the guy squats over 1,000 pounds with no wraps, right? But he's fat. And it's because the guy literally is in a calorie surplus every day. This is a guy who probably is never in a calorie deficit. So he has built an enormous amount of fat, but look at all the muscle he's built with it. Sumo wrestlers are the same thing. Like if you go look at DEXA scans they've done on sumo wrestlers, because of all the fat they carry, they already get drug-like results. So underneath all the fat, but it's because of the overeating. So that's something to consider too. Your caloric intake, your food intake, the quality of your sleep, your ability to de-stress. Because when you look at the most extreme case, you take one of these superhero type situations or a comic book character, and if anyone who looks at the way the body responds, it would make sense that, yeah, you could get those results. And what we would think of as just a matter of days. It'd be almost instantaneous. So ultimately what it comes down to is the faster you can force yourself to recover, and that has to do with quality of your rest, stress management, fatigue management, nutrition, all of that stuff. The faster you can recover from a workout, the more quickly you can train again, and the more new adaptations you can make. That's why when we talk about this stuff, why recovery speeds up growth so much, is because, again, what you're fighting against all the time is stimulating and adapting to new adaptation while recovering from it, while fighting against detraining, right? Because every workout that you do over the days, you are detraining from every single session you've done in your entire life. So you're always fighting against that detraining component. So that's why the recovery matters. Whereas in the person who's in that situation, because they're training multiple times a day and recovering instantly, they never fight against the detraining. So it's just this whole balancing act of finding the balance between those while maintaining positive adaptation moving forward. When you understand that, it starts to make sense when you tell people that, look, the better you control all the factors in your life that allow for better recovery, the more frequently you can train, or the more adaptation you can stimulate by training more in any given session. That's also an option. Because again, if you've got extra abilities to handle the recovery end of it, because again, you're managing your lifestyle, you're going to get faster results. And in other words, your time frames, and people say, how fast can I make gains? It's like, well, it's not just how fast can you make gains, it's like how fast can you manage the recovery and the fatigue and everything, because that is actually going to be your limiting factor on how quickly you can adapt, because it's going to affect how often you can train hard and with what sort of workloads. So it's just something for people to think about. That really falls into your answer of, how fast can you make progress? Well, it's like really how fast can you recover and stimulate adaptation again while fighting against the detraining side of it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.